Buenos días, bienvenido al pabellón español. Bueno, for me, it's a pleasure after having been yesterday for the main event at the Italian pavilion, being Italian but living in Spain. Actually, it's a double pleasure. And I'm Gianluca Misuraka, and I'm the team leader and one of the key experts on the InTouchAI.eu, that is the international outreach for human-centric artificial intelligence, an initiative funded by the European Commission External Action Service for Foreign Policy Instruments and implemented with the DG Connect, that is the European Commission policy DG in charge of digital policies.
And I am Gry Hasselbalg. I'm the AI ethics key expert, co-leading the initiative with Gianluca here. I'm also extremely pleased to be here and to actually moderate the session today we have on sustainable AI, but also in general just having a conversation about human-centric AI. What is this concept?
Yes, and yesterday we had already a number of activities, but also we have what we call the AI Walk, a virtual tour with several EU member states, and then we will tell a bit more about that. But now, without further ado, I would like actually to give the floor to our host, and muchas gracias, Embajador Inicio Palacio de España.
Thank you. I'm Inigo de Palacio España. I'm the Ambassador of Spain here in the United Arab Emirates. I'm delighted to be with you. I was looking at my watch to deliver on Brussels punctuality. It is exactly 2 p.m., too sharp. Thank you for coming. I wish you well to welcome all and to thank the European Commission and the European External Action Service for organizing this two-day meeting. It is an honor to host this session at the Spain Pavilion. I hope you visited it and you enjoyed it. It's a marvel, particularly when you go underground. You need to go underground to appreciate this. Artificial intelligence is one of the world's highest growth industries, and you've been speaking about this yesterday, and you will continue to do it today. The AI sector was valued, I was looking at figures these past days, according to sources, about 600 million in 2014, and is projected to reach a 150 billion by 2026, and perhaps this is a very moderate figure. But it is also a major challenge if we are to ensure that we can enjoy all its benefits and to limit its risk. It is a very complex concept. You are the experts, I'm not. And I understand this covers a lot of technologies, and it's not apart from the core technologies like blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, 5G, communications, big data, Internet of Things, or virtual reality, known as the tribes of AI. This is a term that we used to utilize when I was working, right becoming ambassador here. I work in a Spanish multinational, Indra, for 7 years, and we used to call them the tribes of AI. This is somebody who invented this term, must be very well known to you, but you know, it covers a lot of concepts. But you know, the subject matter of this workshop is AI in relation to human-centric approach. Basically, I suppose everything that has to do with health and green. Both fields are going to be crucial for attaining the SDGs successfully. And that is why I think it is very relevant that we deal with them today from a human-centric perspective. I was telling you that after 7 years in our technology and innovation multinational, from the very beginning, 3 issues appear to me as being particularly relevant in the process of digitalization of our societies. First, healthcare, for the power to transform societies and to disseminate development. Smart cities, because it encompasses a number of technologies that are going to be able to make our lives better. And of course, cybersecurity, without which none of this would be possible. In all three, AI has crucial importance. The relevance of AI in healthcare, and I will make some comments on this, is well proven by the fact that the WHO decided to publish its first global report on the issue in July 2021, Ethics and Governance of Artificial Intelligence for Health, setting out 6 guiding principles for its use and development. It is clear to all of us that in these post-pandemic times, health has become a universal concern now more than ever. AI and health encapsulate many of the challenges and opportunities that the new technologies offer us. So I'm going to make some comments on this, which I hope can be useful for the larger debate we will hold today. I'm sure that you will be better prepared to enlighten us on relevant EU policies and practice. Artificial intelligence and related technologies are increasingly applied to healthcare. These technologies have the potential to transform many aspects of patient care, as well as administrative processes within provider, payer, and pharmaceutical organizations. Whether it is used to find new links between genetic codes or to drive surgery-assisting robots, artificial intelligence is reinventing modern healthcare through machines that can predict, comprehend, learn, and act. In the form of machine learning, it is a primary capability behind the development of precision medicine, widely agreed to be a sorely needed advance in care. AI will be also capable of mastering new breakthroughs, diagnosis and treatment recommendations. It seems likely that most radiology and pathology images will be examined at some point by a machine. Speech and text recognition are already employed for tasks like patient communication and capture of clinical notes, and the usage will increase. To sum up, in my modest view, there are basically 5 main uses for AI in healthcare, where big and small companies are developing new and innovative solutions at a very fast pace. First, using AI efficiently, as I said, to diagnose, reduce error, and developing new medicines are evident. AI will be, second, greatly enhance the streamlining of patient experience in the healthcare industry. Time is money, and efficiently providing a seamless patient experience allows hospitals, clinics, and physicians to treat more patients on a daily basis. Third, mining and managing medical data. Highly valuable information can sometimes get lost among the forest, trillions of data points, and that makes the industry lose, from what I read, around 100 billion euros a year. Must be far-fetched, must be modest. There's a lot of money. And finally, so I said, AI robot-assisted surgery thus led to fewer surgery-related complications, less pain, and quicker recovery time. According to expert reports, the greatest challenge to AI in healthcare is not whether the technologies will be capable enough to be useful, but rather to ensure their adoption in daily clinical practice. It will not replace clinicians, perhaps the only healthcare providers who will lose their jobs over time, maybe those who refuse to work alongside artificial intelligence. And finally, as for the debate, because I think this is very much linked to the issues that you will be dealing with today, the most difficult issue to address given today's technology is transparency. It was subject of discussion, I suppose, in the forum yesterday. We are likely to encounter many ethical, medical, occupational, technological changes with AI in healthcare. It is important that healthcare institutions, as well as governmental and regulatory bodies, establish structures to monitor key issues, react in a responsible manner, and establish governance mechanisms to limit negative implications. I'm bringing my words to a close, the European Union is well aware of the importance of these ethical issues, as well as connecting industrial, academic and government research agencies so that the Union and the Member States do not lag behind in the current revolution. I look very much forward to your contributions to date. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for betting with me, you experts. Thank you.
Okay, muchas gracias, Your Excellency. And now, taking advantage of the fact that we have here Pietro De Matteis, Commissioner for Expo from the European Commission External Action Service. So we will give you the floor. So thanks for being with us. Pietro has been very instrumental. So grazie. Thanks a lot for having this, for organizing this event with so many member states involved. And grazie. Very nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thank you very much, everybody. So I'll be very brief. I just want to welcome you all on behalf, of course, of the European Union here at Expo 2020. I'm the Deputy Commissioner General for the European Union here. I just want to mention that today it's clear that European cooperation is essential, and we see this in many different fields. We see climate change, we see for dealing with migration, and today is even with security issues in our neighborhood. So the only way as Europeans to ensure that we have a voice globally is actually by working together. And that's why I think this event is so important, because actually it brings together many different countries, and actually I want to mention them. Austria, Belgium, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Spain, of course, the host, which has been partnering with us for many other events in the past, and we thank you very much for their cooperation over the past few months at Expo. Sweden, Estonia, and Romania. We think the strength of the European Union is actually our unity. And this has been the objective and the approach of the European Union at Expo over the past 5 months. We think that by working together, by sharing good practices, we can actually bring together and connect people, connect cities, connect experts like you, facilitate then bringing forward our policy priority. And so I think that the European Union has a lot to share, and we saw in different fields. I mentioned climate, environmental issues, and also increasingly in issues so important such as artificial intelligence. The future is in technology, and if we want a European approach to technologies such as artificial intelligence to be able to resist in the very competitive environment in which we are, we have to work together, and I hope this event will allow us to step forward in this direction. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. What a beautiful pavilion, beautiful room we're in right now. Thank you. I will now ask the panelists for the first workshop on AI for sustainability to come to the stage.
And yes, thanks again to the Deputy Commissioner Pietro De Matteis, the Ambassador, and indeed I also invite you to, while the colleagues come on stage, to visit this virtual walk that has been developed by our team of the InTouchAI.eu project, and that also put together the power of artificial intelligence with the artistic creativity, and this is very important. So for each of these web board, there is actually a specific artist that's been developed, has been showcased. Like yesterday, we had also an AI art performance by Franz Rosati that is here with us, and in the Finnish pavilion, and that was also very nice. So in the future Expo or other events, I'm sure we will go farther after this experimentation of this, let's say, mix of hybrid, virtual and real activities. And now I give the floor to Gri and for this very important workshop.
Yes, thank you, Gianluca. And you've seen we moved a little bit around with the microphones. We're in COVID time, so we have a few microphones and microphones that has to be cleaned also while we're talking. So that's, this workshop is going to be lively in all kinds of ways. But mostly because of the content and the excellent people I have here with me. So in case you missed it, we are here for the AI and Sustainability workshop. I have here with me 2 projects, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I'm very happy to have the 2 project representatives, but one is missing for some of the reasons I talked about before. And then I have 4 experts that will talk about AI for sustainability, and we'll try to talk a little bit about the European approach and in a global context as well. And the way I'm thinking about this workshop and the way we agreed on working on this and talking today is that we have 2 sessions or kind of 2 themes we'll try to develop. First, we'll go into looking at some of the projects, some of the European excellent projects on AI, and we'll look at how they're described, and we'll see some videos, and we'll have the experts comment on these. And then afterwards, we'll try to move and take things to a little bit of a global level from a macro perspective, and see how can we think about this European approach to AI, how can we think about sustainability in the more global context. And in the second part, that's where we will probably have more, try to also include some of you sitting here, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, so we'll have a more open conversation there. So I wanted to frame this debate a bit. Now, I've said this for some of you who were here yesterday, during our event yesterday. I used to say this, and I have this comment that I usually say is that of course the human species, humans, we are at one and the same time. We're creative, but we're also a destructive force. And I mean, in terms of climate change, this is really evident here. You know, climate change is, if anything, it's a human product, of course. And it's one of the more destructive kinds, because we can also think of more creative products of humanity. But what we also have to think about here is that we have these things like technologies that can help us to readjust and craft some of the changes that we actually need to mitigate something like climate change. So this idea that we have a technology like AI that can help us mitigate environmental challenges seems to be a very new thing. But actually, if we look at the history of the Sustainable Development Agenda, then actually this is something that we've been aware of for a while. The idea that we can use technology to help us in these things. So I wanted to start this debate with a quote from the report from the Human Environment Conference. Some of you might know it. It took place in Stockholm, Sweden in 1972. And I quote, I like this quote here. "In the long and tortuous evolution of the human race on this planet, a stage has been reached when, through the rapid acceleration of science and technology, man has acquired the power to transform his environment in countless ways and on an unprecedented scale." So in this report that we see from this conference in 1972, we see this kind of urgency, and it was a conference. It was the first conference that actually started the entire Sustainable Development Global Agenda. And this is also where we, for the first time, saw this idea that we had to coordinate globally. We had to work together globally to address this project of changing the human impact, the problematic human impact on the environment. And it's also where we started talking about environmentally sound technologies. And this means actually technologies that are capable of reducing environmental damage, while at the same time, in and by themselves, they are also sustainable by design, enduring implementation, and also adoption. And actually also proposing that there is alternative ways to, as they state in this report, existing harmful technologies. So now we're here 50 years later, and we see AI taking this center stage as this technology that really has a lot of opportunities, and we'll see and hear about that today. But we'll of course also see that as all human products, it's a two-sided coin. So it carries risks, it carries harms, it is a human technology that can also disturb our environment. And this is where this human-centric approach comes into the picture. We have had a lot of global policy discourses. It emerged within the last couple of years on this discussion on AI and the impact of AI in society. We developed the approach. Actually, we talked a lot about it in the EU high-level group that both me and Amy was a member about. It's the foundation for our work. It's been repeated in the UNESCO and the OECD ethics principles. And of course, this shows that we share a common objective, all of us. We want to do good for humanity. But of course, what I think is more important to think about is that we have this faith in humanity. We have this faith in we can actually change things, this idea that we have the power to reflect on this impact we have. So we can create alternative socio-technical infrastructures that empowers us to change these environmental damages. And I think that the EU here, and that's something we will be discussing, but it's what the EU is trying to do. Presented it, for example, in the European Green Deal in December 2019, and with the European Climate Law that was committed to the objective of climate neutrality by 2050. And we have a lot of European policies on sustainable development and green transition that are recognizing that these digital technologies like AI, they can really enable to attain some of these sustainable development goals. So, with that kind of framing of the debate, I would like to move into this presentation of some of the projects that we have here. And the first one is Sibelle, and unfortunately this is one of the representatives that we couldn't have here today, Yanis Giorgio. But we have the video. So, let's move into...
coordinator of the Sibelle research project. Sibelle is a 3 years Horizon 2020 funded research project involving 31 partners across Europe. It's looking at the digitization of agriculture and how supercomputers can actually play a role in that. TCG's role is we're a coordinator of the project and we're also involved in one of the pilots. Pilots mainly focus on the agricultural area and they're broken down into two parts. Livestock farming and agricultural crop farming. Some of the use cases that we look at is taking satellite imagery of large farming areas and trying to segment the farming area into high-grade crops and lower-grade crops. So potentially farmers can harvest the high-grade crops first and potentially sell them as a higher value product into the market. We're looking at also livestock farming as well. So one of the use cases there is looking at a pig farming scenario where we have, potentially large pig farms would have limited human resources to manage such a large number of pigs. We're using computer vision technology to detect pig behaviour and to alert pig farm managers to be able to come in and manage their pig crop a lot more effectively. Also making sure that the welfare of the pigs are taken care of. Finally, one of the scenarios that, or one of the pilots that TCG is involved in is looking at aquaculture in the Mediterranean and how can video footage of large distributed fish tanks can be used to help in the fish farming practices. So we're taking sensor data and weather data from the fish tanks and using it to come up with the best kind of food feeding models so that we can have the most productive fish crops. So all of those scenarios, what they have in common is that they're trying to leverage the power of supercomputers. So by training artificial intelligent models to process the data coming from those different production environments and to help farmers make much better and accurate decisions, all the while trying to ensure that they can improve food production for them, improve the quality of the food, and to reduce food waste. Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. And this was the time when we would have had a conversation with Yanis. Unfortunately, we cannot. We can think about him, but and send good thoughts. So let's move on to the next question. So this was the next project. This project was presenting how you can use AI in the context of agriculture. The next project, let's have a video now, is iEnergy, which is represented by Spiros Moussakitis. You have to tell me if I pronounce it right. Yeah. And maybe we should show your video first.
Our future depends on clean and sustainable energy. AI is bound to play a vital role in our quest for sustainability. The energy sector needs to embrace AI to fight against climate change and environmental degradation. iEnergy goal is to research and promote the use of AI in the energy sector for delivering better and more accurate forecasts, efficient demand and supply predictions, increased grid flexibility, optimized maintenance and operation. iEnergy will demonstrate the benefits of AI technologies in the energy sector in 15 use cases over 8 countries. One of our use cases is the use of AI for forecasting network loads and demand for the transmission system operator in Portugal. Using past time series for load data and weather data, we experiment with different machine learning and deep learning algorithms such as pattern sequence forecast, long short-term memory and NVs, to improve the accuracy of network loads and demand forecasts. The machine learning algorithms are able to provide better predictions for nonlinear problems. The better forecasts are significant for optimizing the operational planning and costs at TSOs. This leads to better energy efficiency and grid flexibility and reliability. Another use case is the use of AI to leverage sources of flexibility, including demand response, storages, flexible loads, and renewable energy sources to reduce reverse power flow. A virtual energy community is implemented based on 50 smart meters of flexibility market users and one phaser measurement unit. A set of time series clustering techniques such as k-means, dynamic time warping, and autoencoders will be used for the assessment of demand response capacity based on load profiles. Load profiling along with derived data can contribute to suggest specific demand response programs that will lead to better energy efficiency and reduce reverse power flow. That will further prevent power losses and reduce life cycle of assets. Another iEnergy use case is to develop AI tools to predict demand in electric vehicles charging stations and to propose incentives and mechanisms to enhance demand flexibility. In this use case, we collect data from publicly accessible charging stations, analyze data, and identify patterns and predictions of demand in charging stations. Electricity retailers can offer incentives for users to charge their vehicles in the time frame that electricity generation is dominated by renewable energy sources, therefore further contributing to the protection of the environment. Our results will be published in the European AI on Demand platform, the one-stop shop for AI resources. Find out more at iEnergy.eu.
Thank you, Spiros. This was so Spiros. I'm thinking now, if you want to say a little bit more about this project, the thing I know that you've been working both as you have a long history of experience with software engineering, and you have years of experience in industry, and you've worked with a lot of projects like this before. But specifically in terms of the iEnergy project, you recently closed a first round of open calls to select European SMEs and startups for pilots in the energy sector. Could you tell us something more about the pool of these and the most interested selected ideas?
Thank you very much. Buenos dias. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here because iEnergy project has sustainability, at its very core, and a human-centric approach. So we had these open calls and that ran between November and January. We were very pleasantly surprised that we received more than 120 applications, and they were all of high quality. They had a clear business case, and it showcased that the impact on the energy sector, the impact of AI on the energy sector is already here. And they all had a clear positive impact also in the environment, which was part also one of our assessment criteria. So to give you just a glimpse, we had cases like long-range drones that have cameras in order to identify defects on power lines. So these defects are very small to the eye. Some go below 0.4 millimeters. So the idea here is to use super resolution GANs in order to enhance these images. And this is an idea that can be transferred to other cases where you can have, let's say, a camera with lower resolution, but then you can use techniques like the GANs in order to increase the resolution, so you then need less energy for the sensors. Another use case is preventive maintenance in hydro plants, that they can extend the remaining useful life up to 30%. So besides the evident benefits from the energy efficiency that you have in such a way from the preventive maintenance, there is also less waste from all the assets that continue to operate smoothly within the hydro plant. We had very interesting cases for demand response, how the grid can balance the demand in a way that's smooth and you don't lose energy because you hadn't predicted really well the demand. For instance, we have forecast about the level of snow or the water coming from snow for hydro plants, which is very important for their efficient operation. So we have all these really good use cases on how AI can help sustainability. These proposals, once they start, we will have a technology transfer program, a mentoring program, where we plan to put from the beginning the sustainability by design, the trustworthiness from design, meaning, okay, we have these good benefits for the environment. How now we can ensure that the way to reach there to these solutions, we're not, the net impact is positive. How we make sure that the training that is required, the resources that are needed for the training and the serving, don't cause damage also to the environment, to the sources. So, yeah. So we also have a lot of a very interesting. I didn't have time to showcase all of them, but if you go to our site, you will see we have many interesting use cases on high energy, including how the climate change also affects the efficiency of some renewable energy sources, such as how the way that the climate change affects the efficiency of solar panels.
Thank you. And there's so many things I want to ask in connection with this, but I think we should do like a little marathon of projects, and then we'll have a conversation about them afterwards. It's really very good, interesting. So the next project, let's take this. This is Annie Reimann is presenting the project here, and let's start again like with the other projects with a little video so we can get an introduction to it.
Yes.
Hi, Sanja. So I mean, you're the project lead for the city of Amsterdam in general, but and you've also, I mean, one thing I've noticed about your CV, your bio when I was looking, you lived in a lot of places. You've been working in China, South Korea, Germany, and Netherlands. And so, of course, I want to ask you about this, but maybe we'll talk about that later in the second half. What does this experience mean to when you work on a project like this? But then let's start with this project. So what does the city of Amsterdam want to achieve with this project, and how do you integrate something like trustworthy AI into this project that you've been actually Amsterdam in general has been adopting for many years now?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very happy to be here, first of all. Just like Spiros also mentioned, great to be invited to speak on this. For the city of Amsterdam, I think it's very unique, this project, that we cooperate together with other cities, 6 cities in total that you maybe saw in the video. And that we all together basically have the issue on how can we speed up CO2 neutrality. And especially in the mobility and energy sector, we have lots of CO2 emissions. So how can we actually, get rid of that faster? That's why we joined this project, because actually we have an ambition as well when we want to be climate CO2 neutral. But with this project, actually, without it, we would not make it. And so it's very, the ambitions are high, but we also need these kind of projects so that we can reach our ambitions. So why we joined it is simply we wanted to work on this issue with other cities together. And you saw maybe in the video, it's about public procurement. It's a very powerful tool that you can have as a city, as a large buyer of all kinds of solutions. And this project helps to create a market, because there are not that many solutions yet on the market that help us reduce CO2. And that's why we started this project. So we had lots of companies that applied, 100, and we invited the best 41 to think of solutions, and then in the end also the best 20 to develop a prototype. This year we're actually going to test the best 6 solutions. And there is also how does that connect to the human-centric AI and what we've been doing for a long time in Amsterdam. Together with the city of Helsinki, we actually made an algorithm registry. And this project with the companies that are developing their solutions is the first time that external companies will have to post their algorithm online, explaining the technology and also the choices that they made in the algorithm to, what their solution is basically doing. And I think that really contributes to transparency and trustworthiness of AI.
Thank you, and I'm excited to hear about. Also, I'm from Copenhagen myself, so I like to hear about this project. So we have some experts here on stage as well. There's one expert missing also, unfortunately, Sara Martinez, that has been working really hard on this workshop as a session manager, writing a very in-depth background paper. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here either. But we have the rest of you, and I'm very happy to have you here to actually help me think about this. Is there something unique about these projects, something specific that we can call European, or maybe they're just like any other project? I don't know. Let's think about it. And so the first person I would like to ask something is Amy van Winsberg. Amy is Van Humboldt professor at the Bonn University and actually founder of the Sustainable AI Lab. And as you know, me and Amy, we know each other from the high level group, but also actually I'm leading an initiative or a research project at Amy's lab, which is the Data Pollution and Power initiative, where we're looking at data pollution as these interrelated effects on the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's really interesting. But Amy, so you founded this Sustainable AI Lab, and you're also working generally on, you're not just working as an academic, but you're also working on raising awareness on the sustainability of AI, as you call it. And so, for example, recently you were at COP16, and now you're here at Expo 2020. And I'm curious about two things. First, when and why you started concerning yourself with the thinking about sustainable AI, and then again this thing, what do you think European and any other also AI projects like these need to consider in terms of the sustainability of AI, and what role can and should a European AI ecosystem play on a global sustainable development agenda? These are a lot of questions you have to, please choose maybe and pick and start, and maybe the last one we can talk about together also.
Okay, yep, sounds good. And also, am I allowed to comment on the projects to
Please do
get that
so.
going
Yes.
as well? Okay. So before I do that, then I'll say a little bit about my approach to sustainable AI. And the workshop is AI for sustainability. But I think what I've been trying to describe in the last year is that we should consider sustainable AI as a sort of umbrella term that has two branches. One branch being AI for sustainable ends, AI to help us achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, but another branch being the sustainability of artificial intelligence, right? Because it doesn't make too much sense to use an unsustainable technology to achieve sustainable ends, but we don't understand the complexity and the scope of the environmental impact of AI yet. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it requires transparency. Like we heard this morning, we need transparency. We need companies and academics to start measuring carbon emissions, computing power. We need to look into the procurement chain. Where are the minerals coming from? We can guess where they're coming from mines that happen where individuals are working in slave-like conditions. Land usage, water usage, the electronic waste, right? There are so many ecological consequences to think about when we're talking about the development and the use of artificial intelligence, and that needs to become a part of our equation for measuring whether or not this is a good or a bad technology for the global community, right? So going back to the human-centric AI, I brought this up before, who is the human that factors into the human-centric AI, right? Because the way that we're thinking about it right now seems a little bit, we are the humans in the human-centric AI, but there are marginalized and vulnerable demographics who suffer the consequences of the climate crisis the most, and they don't have a voice in this discussion. So that's my take on sustainable AI, and I'm trying to push for a focus on the sustainability of AI over AI for sustainability. So then a couple of things that I had wanted to say or comment on. We talked about climate change a couple of times in the panel so far, and it was in your slideshow. I think we should probably refer to the climate crisis rather than climate change, just to add some sort of emphasis to the pressing and relevant situation that we're in. But also happy to debate that, if anyone wants to debate that. Right, so Cybele, the first project. So really interesting project, so the feedback that I'm giving is really to sort of play devil's advocate here. But the idea of digital agriculture used for livestock and crop farming. I thought it was really interesting, when he was talking about these big farms that don't have enough human staff. And I was reminded of the debate in the healthcare space. We don't have enough healthcare workers, so that's why we want to look at robotics and artificial intelligence as a possible solution. And I find it really interesting that we go to this technological solution instead of looking at the working conditions in these situations. So in the healthcare space, it's very well known that healthcare workers are undervalued, underpaid. And it would be fascinating to see if we change that first. Would we have this problem for which we are trying to use AI and robotics? Same in the farming situation, right? Undervalued, understaffed, underpaid. Would we need AI in this situation if we focused on that being the problem and how we solve it in a social way rather than a technological way? for InTouchAI.eu, really cool name. I could feel that you sort of saw me beside you because you were talking about the sustainability of AI part. So I thought that was really great that you're also taking that in. And then going back to Gree's question about like, what can we learn from this? This is, you know, the classic case of what we can learn, that it's looking at how do we minimize environmental impact sort of in general, but then turn the lens on ourselves and then look at how we ourselves are not contributing or exacerbating the problem. So I thought that was really great. And then I had little questions about, like, you know, the data that you're using in the Portugal project. It's historical data on the weather, but with the climate crisis, we have these unpredictable weather changes and things like that. Yeah, and then just my last point had to do with AI for cities. And again, what I'm trying to get at with talking about the sustainability of this technology is to really make us question why we are using the technology in all of these domains. So AI for cities, again, a really interesting project. But when we're talking about reducing carbon emissions in the cities, why not have roads or spaces where you can't have cars, where it's just walking or cycling areas? I mean, it seems like such a, you know, like top of the head, why don't we just have more people walking or invest more in the public infrastructure rather than having this other technology that comes in that adds, you know, this other layer of complexity and on and on. But of course I know that these cities are already thinking about that. So again, I'm trying to get at, you know, why aren't we talking about these easier solutions that can solve the problem in a much simpler way without contributing more to environmental consequences. So I leave it there. I hope I answered your question and stirred up some
definitely, and that makes me rearrange things a little bit. I would really like to hear your kind of, I can see you're sitting and there's things you want to, I think we're supposed to, sorry, these are the times where we have to clean the microphones.
I think it's on, yeah. Yes, definitely. I think the cities that are in AI for cities, they already work on these issues. I mean, it's very plausible to do that. Amsterdam also is actually looking to abolish gasoline, like cars. So we very soon are only allowed in the inner city to have electric cars. But I think the pragmatism behind here, that's an example I want to give. So one of the use cases in AI for cities is building management systems. So we're working really hard using AI. Okay, how can we make the building more efficient, the energy that's used in it, turning off the lights and usage of energy. And then my colleagues were thinking, yeah, but on the other hand, we make a building more efficient, 18%, but actually it's empty. So, okay, maybe we need to look at how are we using all our buildings, and should we maybe combine buildings and maybe don't use these buildings anymore. So, of course, like with all the whole AI talk, we are also looking into pragmatic solutions to maybe we don't need this building anymore. Definitely important to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
But you see my point, You see my point about how, like, questioning why AI for cities and not.
Yeah,
definitely.
Spears, maybe you can get Anna. You haven't used it yet, so Okay. Sorry, it's a little bit with the COVID times.
Here, this one.
This one that hasn't been used.
Thank you. So,
and actually, so can I, because Amy was talking about how you were thinking about the sustainability of AI, and we've earlier had a conversation when we were preparing for this, how you were actually thinking about the trustworthy AI, because like the EU approach while you were working on this. And does this have like a, I'm thinking, is this something that you can identify yourself with as something that these conditions from being an EU project was something that made you consider these things, or is it something that you already were?
Okay, first of all, you know, I have a technological background, and as many other people, especially data scientists or people that have caught the wave of the AI, we initially are not thinking about the sustainability. Our first reaction is, wow, this is a cool tool. Let's go and make a neural network out of everything. Any prediction, any clustering, everything. So this is our first natural reaction. But then that's why we need the European approach and research like the one we have done, because it helps us. We have all the good intentions not to harm the environment. And I think there are many data science that think like that. We don't want to hurt the environment, but we want to make also a business plan, and we know we want to showcase an added value. That's why we needed guidance, and this guidance needs to be on a global scale, starting from the initiative of Europe, but on a global level, because we need, first of all, to understand the risks. We need to understand to think in terms of sustainability, which we need to go into this mindset, because as I said before, if you're led by your technological appetite, you will end up doing more harm than good.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Can we take it at the end?
Yeah.
Because I would really love to include the other experts also. No, but it's wonderful that we get so excited about this debate, no? I would really like to include you, Emanuela Girardi, and you're the founder. Sorry? Yeah, it's true. But so I can introduce you at the meantime. You're the founder of and president of POP AI, which is actually short for Popular Artificial Intelligence. I'm looking forward to hear what that means, which is an association that investigates the impact of AI, the impact on people's daily lives, and raises awareness among the public and companies on the benefits of and the potential risks of AI technologies. And you are also co-author of the Italian National AI Strategy, and you might have an interesting view on, and I'm sure you have, on the unique value of the European approach and how these projects, how do you think that they're contributing to this?
Okay, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's really an honor, and it's also very interesting. I mean, not only to be here in person, one of the first times since the last 2 years, but also for really listening to, to practical projects, to see practical projects, to see pragmatic use of AI, because we talk a lot about AI, but at the end, we need to use more AI, I think. And this is also one of the goals of POP AI. POP AI really, try to bring AI to people, to teach them how we can use AI in a safe way, according to the European vision, and how to understand the risk and how to manage the risk. So this is very important, so that really we need to bring the AI awareness to people and to teach them how to use it in a safe way. So it's really interesting to see all these applications of AI. And referring to the European vision, I would like to start also from what Amy said. It was very interesting. That AI is very useful, and especially AI for sustainability. But I think that when we use AI, and we really need to think, first why we use it AI for, and also to understand, the environment before using AI technologies. And for this, I would like to recall the very first definition, European definition of AI, that it was in the paper that you wrote, the ethical guidelines for AI, that AI refers to systems that display intelligent behavior by analyzing their environment and taking action with some degree of autonomy to reach specific goals. I think this is a very important definition, because you have the goals, so very important is to define the goals. And second, you need very well to define the environment, because if you don't understand the environment, then you take the wrong decision, and then you also have some, there could be some dangerous situation. So I think the first thing that it's very good in the European vision is to define, probably already in the 72, like you mentioned in this conference, to define that the goals is the sustainable development, and to introduce these 3 dimensions. So it's not only economic, but it's also social and environmental. And the other thing is that in all the European paper that has been written, it has also been included the SDG, the 2030 UN agenda with the 17 SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the 17 goals, the 169 sub-goals. And I think that if I think about, when yesterday we arrived in the Expo, and they told us that there are 192 countries that are presenting here their pavilion, and I think that this agenda has been signed by 193 countries. It's really the most, common agenda that we have worldwide. So it is really important that what we state in the European vision, that we use these goals, this agenda, for the goals for which we want to use AI. So this is the first point. The second point about the environment, I think that, we really need to understand well the environment. And the European approach, the human-centric approach, is necessary, is very important, but it's not enough. I think that we need a sort of paradigm shift that we already did with the Green Deal, and we need to use a planet-centric approach. Because at the end, if we think that, human being, we are one of the 8.7 million species that are in the world, and if we think about, there are lots of scientists that say that we already have this sort of the sixth mass extinction, and instead, if you think about like in the last 50 years, human population more than doubled, and probably, will double again the next 150 years if we're still here, hopefully. And instead, if we look at the wild animals, since the 70s, 2/3 of them, they're not there anymore. So I think that this is really important. We need to understand that, we are not the focus, of all these strategies. We are part of an ecosystem, and we really need to put the center the planet. So really adopt this planet-centric approach. And this is also in the Green Deal, of course. And then the other point I think that we need to understand again in the environment is that, we need to understand which one the scarce resources, because if we need to collect data, we need to understand which kind of data. And the scarce resources today, are not the one of the traditional economy, like the capital and the labor, but today the scarce resources are natural resources. So we were thinking, yesterday we were hearing about, AI technology, so you need lithium, you need cobalt, you need magnesium, and so on. So we cannot keep on exploiting the planet like we're doing today. And I think that we need to move, like Kenneth Boulding said, that we need to move from this cowboy economy to the space shuttle economy. So basically, we need to think that we're in a space shuttle and everything has to be reused, like in really this circular economy approach that is really the core of the Green Deal in Europe. So, considering all this, and considering also the fact that we have in the white paper this dual vision of AI, so great benefit and great opportunities on one side, and on the other side some risk. I think that what I saw in this project, and it's really interesting, is that you always have this dual use. So on one hand, you're trying to use AI, for several projects, like for energy, for smart cities, and so on. But on the other side, you really need to think also about the impact that AI can have while using it. Like yesterday, Amy presented us with the carbon footprints of AI. And so we really need to ask ourselves, is it worth using this? Like yesterday, you mentioned some, I think GPT-3. Or another algorithm, and GPT-3 is an algorithm that has been trained in 172 billion parameters, and just from one training session, I think you mentioned it yesterday, it's the equivalent of 10,000, they use 10,000 GPUs, which is the equivalent of using a car, with the carbon emission of the car, for more than 800,000 kilometers, just from one training session. And we didn't stop there, because the Americans, they did GPT-3, and then the Chinese, they developed Wudao, which is 10 times more powerful than GPT-3. So I think that when we use AI, also for sustainable development and for climate change, we really need first to ask ourselves, is it worth using AI, and how can we use AI? And so I think that this is really the one, it's the core of the reflection that we need to do before starting using AI. And the last thing for the project is that I think that what is interesting here is that you really have to have this sort of holistic view. So if you use, for instance, AI in agricultural, it can have an impact also in AI for health. Because, for instance, you can use AI, we saw in the first, I mentioned in the first because everybody's talking about so in the first one, maybe they were using AI for reducing the water usage or for reducing the use of fertilization. But on the other hand, they also have a positive impact on health. Because, of course, you have, or on the SDG for health, for water. So, and also for yours, because I mean, if your startup, if you use AI for improving the sustainability of the city, then you improve the air, of course, of the city, the air condition. So I think that we really need to have this holistic view and think that when we use it for something, there is always an impact on something else. And this is really, I think, what we need to think before using AI for sustainable development and also for all the applications.
Yeah, I like that we have had twice today a challenge to the human-centric approach, actually. I'm thinking maybe we want to call it a planet-centric human approach. So the idea is that we have responsibility for the environment, but what we're actually focusing on is this holistic approach to the environment. So that's thank you. It's a very good input. It's good that exactly what we can do. We can criticize and reflect on our own concepts and ideas. So that's good. So now moving on to I'm going to ask the last two experts here and draw them into the room, and then maybe we can, you, Spiros and Anya, you can maybe comment on some of the comments we'll have from the experts here at the end, so we make sure that everyone is included now. So next I have Ricardo Vinuesa. He's Associate Professor at the Department of Engineering Mechanics at KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And he's also a researcher at the KTH Climate Action Center and Vice Director of the KTH Digitalization Platform. Now, Ricardo, I would like to ask you of your opinion on what you think could be done to provide more transparency regarding this environmental impact of AI that we've heard a lot of talk about now. And also, how do you think we could monitor and measure this environmental impact of AI to ensure that the impact is actually positive?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here and to join this very nice panel and this great discussion. First of all, and also connecting with some of the previous discussion, I have led a study where Anna was also co-author, where we showed that 79% of the SDG targets can be positively affected by AI, whereas 35% can be negatively affected by AI. There is potential in this technology to help us, but of course we need to be aware of the negative impacts and also the environmental effects of the technology itself. With only one of the targets being negatively affected, only one, we could overshadow all the positive effects that we can also document. When we look at the environmental impact, I agree with what has been discussed before. I work with high-performance computing, for example, for many years, and there is a very strong awareness of the carbon footprint of the simulations that you're doing. You ask for computer time in a supercomputing center, you simulate for 6 months, they give you what is the economical cost and what is the carbon footprint of that simulation that you have done. So it's important to raise awareness about that. I think the AI community is moving in that direction, but I would argue also that there are ways in which we can diminish the environmental impact of the technology. For example, physics-informed neural networks, physics-guided deep learning. If we know something about the phenomenon that we are trying to model, we should embed that in the model. We should not learn the network learn it. First of all, because of course it will not learn it as good as if it was embedded in the model. And second, because we're wasting resources. Transfer learning, expert input. There are many ways in which we can actually reduce the carbon footprint of the training process, which of course it's massive in some of the applications, as in the GPT-3 that you mentioned before. In my group, we have reduced the training cost of our AI models by a factor of 4 or 5 by using these simple things. It's important to be aware of the technology. It's true that we're using AI in a wide range of areas these days, and sometimes we have to involve people who know about the technology and experts, because it's very easy to just add more parameters and have a more expensive model, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to give you better results. So that awareness of the impact in the environment is very important, and I agree. And there are ways to account for that and measure that. You can just look at the CO2 emissions associated with your computer time or training time, and that's a way to add a constraint in your project as well. So that could be one way to impose these things. When it comes to transparency, I have also worked on interpretability to deep learning models. we know there are many machine learning models that are interpretable, but they're not maybe the most accurate ones. Everybody's going towards deep learning, which is giving you the best results. But sometimes it's really a challenge when you try to deploy these deep learning models in health applications and sustainability applications, and you don't know really how the decisions are being made. There are ways now, by looking at the structure of the network itself and using genetic programming, symbolic regression, to obtain very accurate symbolic expressions that really tell you how the inputs and the outputs are related. So now it is possible, we have some work on that, and there are many groups working on it to add interpretability to deep learning models. And I would argue that that should be a condition to deploy one of these models for medical applications, and it would be essential to have interpretable deep learning models for achieving the SDGs. Without this, we will not be able to have any meaningful implementation for policy decisions. The example of the medical application is very clear. There is the IBM Stream application, right, that was used to diagnose liver failure, and in the end, they ended up using a decision tree model because it was interpretable, even if it was significantly less accurate than the deep learning model. We can, and we know how to do it, we are doing it now. We can add interpretability to the deep learning models, and we have to do it. So I would say that there is some potential. I mean, clearly, and we should also talk about the simpler solutions first. I fully agree with that. But I mean, our work has shown that most of the targets can be positively affected by AI. So we can harness the positive aspects of the technology, but without losing the perspective on what are the challenges and the environmental impact itself. But again, if you involve experts in the decision-making process and you make decisions not purely based on politics or purely based on short-term gains that you can achieve, but involving experts in that policy framework, then you can actually consider these aspects of environmental impact, of how to develop better models that are respecting the privacy of the citizens, that are respecting the transparency requirements of any application. So that should be, I would say, essential if we want to have that 79% that I mentioned. If we want to reach there, we should have all these aspects on the deep learning solutions.
Thank you. It's really, and it makes me, it makes it very smooth to include you also, Anna Philander. And generally, I'm thinking this is also something. When we think back of what I said in the beginning, this concept of environmentally sound technologies and can also the idea that we can actually create alternative technologies, but in order to do that, we actually need to be able to see actually the impact of the technologies and measure the technology. So that's really relevant. And the reason why I think it's relevant to bring you in here, and of course, just to bring you into the debate, we're really happy to have you here. Is of course this idea of social corporate responsibility and some of the tools you need to think about these things when you build technologies. So Anna Philander is one of Sweden's leading experts on the effects of digitalization on organizations, society and economy. She has also been an advisor to the Swedish government, and you've been a chief economist of the Swedbank. You have been head of financial analysis during at the Crisis Management Office of the Prime Minister of Sweden. So you have a really broad experience. And now you founded the AI platform to support organizations in screening and auditing and reporting exposure to ethical risks in AI solutions. Things like the things we talked about today, but also ethical risks in general, I understand. So how do you think European companies' social corporate responsibility, how do you think it's evolving in the context of in the context of sustainable AI? How is this evolving? How do you see this?
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for a fantastic discussion so far. Looking forward also to have a more intensified discussion on these topics. When it comes to artificial intelligence and when it comes to the organizational accountability part of it, that's where I focus on it. I focus early on in my research at Swedbank, for example, from an economist perspective. I focus on the positive externalities on digitalization. And as data-driven technologies and AI were emerging, I saw there was a lot of negative externalities, and they were ungoverned. So while we can talk about how important it is that we do fair AI, that AI doesn't violate the human rights, and that AI can be an enabler to achieving and accelerate the achievement of the SDGs, we have to help organizations solve this. So it has been unbalanced because organizations has been working with AI in silos. So if we talk about explainability and answerability and accountability in an organizational silo working with AI, that doesn't help much to the legal and the business side of the organization. So what I did early on with my research was that I looked at the negative externality like privacy intrusion, discrimination, lost autonomy, social exclusion, harm to safety, as a traditional environmental negative externality. And I said, how do we fast have organizations interpret and integrate these into their business models so the business models could be sustainable? Because the regulation was lagging, and even though we have upcoming EU regulation, there needs to be new governance structures within an organization. So that's my focus. And the key for the research was that we took a multidisciplinary approach to a new, unique risk assessment methodology. So with the legal and the technical and the organizational ethics integrated perspective, we could exhaust the ethical AI risk landscape and categorize and create an insight engine to assess and mitigate the exposure to ethical risks. And with that, it's turning into, we talked about the ESG reporting, we talked about the taxonomy, and now to your question, how are we doing, how are we guiding organizations to do AI sustainably and to do AI to gain environmental sustainability. That's fine, and we have the EU regulation coming up, but as organizational silos have a term as transparency or explainability that the legal and the business department don't understand, we can't deploy and adopt and accelerate AI in the way we want to. So for example, as we talked about health, and I will come to your projects and give you some examples as well. If you have an AI model, AI solution for sensor, heart rate sensor, and in an AI team, you would have a fairness model on that to make the ethical consideration or trade-off between the accuracy of the model and the fairness of the model. Say it's between men and women. And these decisions that are very business critical are now taken within an organizational silos. So when this trade-off is actually employed and scaled, it could violate both against the organization's values and the regulation. So that's where the business area needs to come in, because say that I have a certain trade-off between accuracy and fairness when I'm at the hospital. That could differ when I have the heart sensor sitting at home. So every AI use case needs to be screened from the technical and the business and the legal part of an organization. So that's the dismantling of AI and saying this is not a black box. This should be understood by different departments so they can actually use accountability, transparency, explainability to strengthen their brand. So that's when we say we accelerate. And for now, we know that the upcoming EU regulation and taxonomy, ESG, and corporate social responsibility, it's going to be business crucial for all organizations. but how do you live up to them? So EU has taken a brand or a grand bold stance in saying we're not going to have AI innovations that violates to our values. In that way, we're going to be competitive towards US and China. That's, in my words, that's brilliant, and also regulation forms clarity for innovation, so that will also spur innovation. But how do organizations live up to this? How do they can explain source code without having anyone understand it. So we worked, for example, with the Swedish employment agency on explainability, and explainability in, for example, job profiling or job matching. That's very different based on who you're going to explain to. Are you going to explain to the job seeker, the caseworker, the coder, the legal officer? So that's how we work with them. And just to be on the topic of these three brilliant projects, farming, energy grids, and cities, this is all brilliant, and there should be clear rules so that you can spur this innovation, but with the conformity to values and compliance to EU upcoming regulations. So for example, if you have the smart grid and you project and predict and you trace patterns of humans' energy consumption, where does this brilliancy become privacy intrusion? And for example, when it comes to the maintenance of infrastructure, telecom infrastructure, for example, where does it become, where's the tipping point for where it's cost efficient, but when it's actually leading to social exclusion? Because we can see that some areas where they don't pay the bills as fast as other areas, they get slower maintenance. So everything has to have an ethical filter, whether we have AI solutions for sustainability or if we have sustainable business model.
Yes. Well, that makes a lot of sense. The idea that we can have a regulation and we can require that, for example, projects or organizations, that they actually consider and measure the environmental impact. But how do we then support organizations to actually live up to those requirements? I mean, now you've been sitting and listening, Spiros and Anja, and I would really like to have your input here also concerning the different aspects that's been brought up by the experts here. Is it something that, I mean, mostly the idea, you both of you are working with projects where you have different goals, for example. There's different goals. You want to achieve a sustainable outcome, for example. But at the same time, some of the models that you will use will have a very high energy consumption. How do you, for example, how do you deal with those trade-offs? Is there a trade-off? And how can we maybe create a model where both these two very, very important goals are brought together?
I guess I have a microphone, so I'm going to go first.
Yes, yeah. So natural.
What Spiros mentioned before, I think I can totally relate that AI came up and then we all thought, oh, what an awesome tool, let's do something with AI. And then after that, the broader conversation started, what does it actually mean and what other impacts do the solutions have? So we included that in our selection process with the companies, that we actually asked them to explain what other, possibly also negative effects their solutions could have. And so that's where we made a first step in trying to figure that out. On top of that, now in the last stage of selections, we're also using it as a selection criteria. So if the solution itself has a very large impact, negative impact, then that has an effect on getting to the next round. And I think another thing that Amsterdam at least is trying to do, we have an AI team We have brilliant coders that themselves come up with algorithms and put them online as open source to just get the conversation going. So by just having this team in the city, employed by the city, with like goals, you know, that are purely for the city and having openness and transparency, we try to understand ourselves what it means to use AI and what the implications could be. So just this team of coders in our city, I think, is helping us to get the first step in understanding that. Now, we had this huge scandal in the Netherlands with our tax authority. Yeah, exactly. So that was a problem. And but this team that we have in the city gave us the ability to just discuss this issue just on a deeper level, trying to make sense and, well, improve it in the future to not have these issues.
Could you maybe just explain? I think it's nice to hear exactly if you have a case like this.
The scandal, you mean?
That or another case. It's always good to get words on like concrete situations where things change, for example.
Yeah. So the tax authority used an algorithm to figure out which parents would get money for their children, and actually in the end it turned out that they profiled certain minorities into saying that they did fraud, but in the end they didn't do any fraud, and this profiling happened through the algorithm. So I'm very careful using the word algorithm. Not everything is AI. It was simply an algorithm that was used, and that turned out that this was a huge issue that the tax authority had to look into. And of course, all the other cities in the Netherlands were also like, oh my God, are we using an algorithm? How are we using these algorithms? What does it mean? So this had like a huge wave of discussing how do we look at our citizens, and what services do they get from the city, and how do we make these decisions? Is it supported by an algorithm? And who made this algorithm? Under what kind of, what ideas were behind this algorithm? So that these kind of questions you need to ask to figure out, am I making fair decisions and are they right or not?
And so if we apply that to the context of AI for sustainability, we can say that like a crisis like that makes us see some problems, and in a way we can readjust. Maybe that's the human approach, no? That we actually are able to reflect and see things. So we're at that stage right now. Spiros, I wanted to, and I saw Anna also, you wanted to comment, but I wanted to give the word to Spiros.
Okay, yes. So when we started the project, initially the idea was about sustainability, AI for sustainability and sustainable AI, and as well as the democratization of energy and fighting against energy poverty. But when you are actually starting the project and you are actually creating the models, reality hits and you realize that this is a dynamic situation. Like you need firsthand to make a planning on what are the resources you are going to use. But at the same time, this is very dynamic. The risks that they come, maybe some risks come that you haven't realized beforehand. So the solution is to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And this is where also the global approach is required, because you want to go to specific use cases and find all the potential risks and use this as a guideline to help you. And this can also help the companies and the organizations themselves, because they need the guidelines to know what to look for.
I wanted to actually, Anna, can we save the question? Because I was thinking that maybe we should move on to the next part now of our session and talk a little bit about the European approach in a global context. If there is a European approach, I'm not sure if we actually reach. I mean, we have a regulatory framework, we have some certain conditions, we have some projects here that are European, but I don't know if, or they're placed in Europe, I don't know if we can say that there's something specifically European about them. But if we want to talk about some components of a European approach on these AI projects for sustainability. What do you think is the most valuable? I mean, if we see it in a global context, of course, I think Amy, she really phrased this very well, that when we talk about sustainability, we tend to forget that the world is diverse and there's different ways of experience this sustainability. And so also we heard yesterday about how when we create solutions in Europe, we have to think about also maybe how do they apply in other contexts of the world. So maybe maybe Emanuela, I think you have quite a good experience with, for example, something like the digital twin project.
Yeah, I think, is it working? Yes.
Mm.
I think we have a fantastic project in Europe. It's promoted by European Commission, and it's called Destination Earth. And it's the opportunity of, they're trying to create a digital twin of planet Earth. And this is really, a project that could be exported, like yesterday Malavika was mentioning. You also need to, to look outside Europe, because at the end, sustainability is a global problem, or it's a global opportunity, or it's a global goal. And so this project is really a very interesting project because it allows us to collect data and to monitor what's happening, which one is the impact of a human being, but also the impact of the nature on the planet Earth. And so we can monitor and we can develop some model to test new policy or to test new solutions that we can improve and we can adapt. And I think that this is really useful, especially for modeling and for simulation. And of course, it can be used in climate change, but it can be used also if we think about in food, or it can be used in forestation. Really in agricultural. In several fields, in several verticals. And another very interesting project is developed by the European Space Agency, ESA, and is called I think it's called Twin Earth, or AI Earth. Twin Earths should be called. And this is also another very interesting project because they use the satellite image of planet Earth, and they use them again for creating a sort of another digital twin of the planet Earth. So I think that really, and it comes down also to data, what you were saying even before. It is very important to collect data and to share data. So it is also very important to think about, we're thinking about AI, but we should think about the whole technological stack. So all the different technologies and also the infrastructure that we need for collecting and for sharing data. For instance, when you were talking about your project, the energy, I was thinking about, how can you collect and then now you can share data and you can create a sort of a data sharing project so that everybody can, like you said, open source, then you can make it open source. You can reshare it and reuse it. And I think that in this framework, another very interesting project, a European project, is Gaia-X. Gaia-X is this federated cloud project. And it's, okay, in Europe, we started a little bit later with AI, and not only also with AI, so we are now trying to recover. So we cannot really develop like a European cloud, but we are trying to develop new standards so that, everybody can collect and share data. And I think that this is very important. So, we need to understand from where we are starting, and then we need to see, what we can do together starting from now. And this also reminds me of what you said about your project, Anya, is that you create the market. And I think that this is the most important thing for AI, because if I think about what we're trying to do today in Europe, which we were not so good, I think, until now, we're trying to work on that. We have this very fragmented situation. We have it in research, and we have it in the business, in the economy, because we have thousands of SMEs, and we really need to find some new framework to make them working together, to bring together, like yesterday they were mentioning, for instance, it was very interesting, the Finnish pavilion, they said that it was a very good, a great success because it was a public-private partnership. So this is really the key. I mean, you need to put together the different stakeholders and you need to develop together. And one of these great European projects is ADRA, is the private-public partnership on AI, data and robotics. And we're trying to create this European ecosystem on AI, data and robotics and bring together the different stakeholders, the different disciplines, so the different domains, and in this really creating the market for this. And also realizing, I mean, one of the key points of the European strategy, which is from lab to market, really, I mean, to realize this knowledge transfer. So I think that to be, like also what they said, Matthias, in the beginning, you said that we need to develop partnership, to be open, like you're doing here. And this is also the key. We need to be more open and to cooperate and to learn from what we have, because we have great excellence, especially in research in Europe. And then starting from that, really building this European ecosystem of technology and to really, I mean, to be effective in this. And if I can make the last word, can I have the last word? I think that we also need to be a little bit more bold. So we need to, I mean, to think big, because we don't think that big in Europe. We really need to have this kind of a mentality shift again and to think about moonshot, because if we keep on fragmenting the research project, or like we heard some great ideas today, but we really need to connect them and to think big, because only if you think big, and this brings me to the last point, we need big investment also to think big. And this is also what we are lacking a little bit, probably.
So we need investment, technology, design, and probably also this overall macro narrative about where we're going. So that's the European approach. I saw Anna wanted to say, and then please, Anna, and then while Ricardo gets...
That is the partnership and the crossing the borders of cooperation, that's music to my ears. We've been talking of different railroads and drivers of AI innovations. You said this comes from AI innovations, and then the policy side of it creates the railroads. The academic must work more multidisciplinary, but that's also a driver, and then the organization that wants the fast, seductive profits of AI. But we lost an angle here that I think will have a great impact on how we look at this, because the social concern will start or have started exploding, and I think it will start in Europe. And the only thing we have is the power to opt in or opt out, and to realize the social or the people's ability to vote by sharing their data. The City Progress project, it's always a tipping point. For a smart city is brilliant, like a smart house is brilliant, a smart car is brilliant, and when you connect them, I get a brilliant, efficient life, I think. But when does that tipping point go? How smart can a city be without privacy intruding me? How smart can I be in my selection of opting in and opting out? Well, not so smart, because I don't have the overview of how my data is being used. Could it be misused? What if I, as a human being and a citizen, or a customer to an organization, would have really clarity about that this organization and this city has a validation of ethical AI or sustainable AI as a certification? I would gladly opt in my data, and then we can explore to even go further with AI innovations for sustainability or what have you. But the gray zone of suspicion and social concern will lead companies to want to do good. They want to show how it's not the tax agency, it's not intentionally. Nothing of these unintended pitfalls is part of anyone's, dream picture. It's damaging for the brand, it's reputational, it's investments that are withdrawn. So how can we make it easy for a citizen, city perspective, or a customer and organization perspective to create railroads and clarity?
And definitely in a European context, this idea of citizen trust, I think, is really relevant. I'm thinking how this, in a global context, these values and these kind of structures of measurement and the regulations, how can we think of these in different contexts than just in the EU, if we're thinking of this in the global perspective, because basically this is a global problem. So if we think about this European approach as something that we're proud of, something that we think can work, then how can it work in other places also? And how can we maybe also, is there things that might be good in this context but harmful in others? So that's also a way of thinking about it. Ricardo, you wanted to comment also.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the aspect of partnerships and knowledge transfer from academics to industry. I think is essential. And the way that is done in Europe in many places is unfortunately a bit like the university is doing consulting work for the companies in many contexts. Some countries work a bit differently, but in many cases it's a bit like that. And that's not how you can make transformative changes that can benefit the industry and then the society. In this sense, the US, for example, they can really get doctoral students who have been trained for many years in the university in very concrete problems, maybe not of immediate application, but with very high skills that can then benefit the companies and can really increase significantly their competitive edge. So I think that in a way we need a paradigm shift so that we can stop thinking that academic work and knowledge transfer is basically doing the company's work, but more we can create new concepts, new techniques, new ideas that may take 10, 20 or 30 years to really have an application, but those skills of those people that are being trained in the context of academic institutions, when they go to the companies, they really can make a difference and make them much more competitive. So in that sense, I think some countries in Europe have that perspective. Most I would say not yet, and we could look a bit at how these things have been done in the US, who have their issues and their shortcomings as well, that's for sure, but in this aspect of thinking big and trying to really establish meaningful partnerships, we really need to change and it's also in the context of the industrial landscape, that maybe in many places the mentality is not that a person with a PhD or with years of experience in research can contribute to the company, but we have seen that they can, and they can really increase their competitivity. So something to think about, I think, in the context of regulation and in the context of maybe giving help to companies or doing it in a different way. The current paradigm of doctoral PhD researchers in industry is not ideal either, because it's more solving problems for the company rather than bringing something new. And I think that could be something important to consider.
I'm thinking maybe if we want to see if there's anyone that has any questions here. Please, yes? Can we, Ole, can we get a microphone? Sorry, it's a little bit.
Hello, thank you everybody for this very insightful discussion. And yeah, I would like to know a little bit more about the AI projects. What concretely do these projects do for the city, build for the city?
Sorry, so we need a...
Just hold it further away from my mouth. What it concretely does? Well, so now we have 6 companies that are going to test their prototype. Actually, 20 companies have made a prototype. 6 companies are going to test it in 2 cities at the same time. And then concretely, we can think about, for example, building management systems. So cities have lots of municipal buildings, and well, we tackle we have issues like insulation. There are old buildings, there are historic buildings. Nonetheless, all of them have a building management system, and you want to have these buildings more efficient. And with some of these solutions, you can make your building more efficient, about 18%, something like that. If we look in the more European perspective, these solutions need to be able to also scale up. So what works in Amsterdam should also work in Copenhagen, should also work in Tallinn, should also work in Paris. So we're dealing with lots of standardization issues as well. The data that Amsterdam saves about buildings is not the same than what Copenhagen saves, or the way that they actually store data. They do it in the cloud, we do it different. So that's like one concrete case that we have. Another one is with mobility. We have lots of logistic vehicles in the city that drive around delivering packages, and so we want to minimize those movements by clustering some of those journeys. That's, for example, another use case. So in these two domains, mobility and energy, we have different solutions and use cases.
And can I ask you, Anja, then, you say how does these projects, you need to be able to transfer them to Paris or Copenhagen, but what if you wanted to transfer them outside Europe?
Yes.
What do you need? I mean, you see where I'm going with this.
Yes. So scalability is a key issue. We started with the 6 cities in the project, but we also have partner cities from all over the world that are interested in the results. So that's the first effort, by sharing the results with those preferred partners, how we call them. But the next step, I think, is to really figure out, okay, what's the standardization that we're talking about, and how does that relate to other cities? So yeah, we're still working on that.
And in this connection, I'm thinking also that, I mean, we're sitting here in a European context, and actually, if you're sitting as a developer here, you actually have the choice very often to choose between different cloud infrastructures and actually build specific technologies, and you actually would be able to have these thoughts about, for example, the impact of the model you use. But if you're in a different context where you only have one choice, for example, how can we transfer these kind of ideas that somehow, to phrase it in a way, it could be a little bit of it could be used as a luxury concern to consider, because there's other needs you might have in another global context. And I'm just thinking now, I'm opening it to the entire panel. What do we need to be able to transfer these kind of very good thoughts and very relevant thoughts about measurement and transparency and capacities of developers, for example, when it comes to thinking about sustainability and AI? I think let's do Avi first.
So I don't know if I have exactly the answer that you're looking for, but I think this is one of the spaces where Europe can have a competitive advantage. So right now we have this conversation about trustworthy AI and the AI Act, so the ethical recommendations being converted into regulation, and this is where Europe is sort of leading the space, leading the conversation. But we also find, and we heard yesterday some of the comments, a Western ethic, which is what the trustworthy guidelines are based on, is different from non-Western ethics. Right, so I had mentioned Aristotle in my talk yesterday, and that's not what the world espouses as their sort of thought leader. So I think we're seeing that there is a problem in our ethical codes being translated on a global scale. And we're talking about liberal democratic states. When you move outside of that space, they have different ways of implementing the technology. I think with the sustainability question, this is a unique opportunity where it's very difficult to disagree with sustainability requirements. Right? We're not talking about sort of control over citizens, we're talking about measuring environmental consequences. So I think it's important for us to make sure that they are embedded in the AI Act. Europe then leads, and that means that we have to be measuring. So I hear what you were saying, where there are a lot of engineers who are interested in it, but it's not mandatory. And I've also worked in the industry space, and they say to me, like, Amy, what's the least that I can do to still be considered ethical? So we make it required. We have policy options where you have to measure. We start to push the green AI ways, and then other countries look at us and say, yeah, of course we should be doing this as well. And by that time, we have a repository of servers that can be used and whatnot that we can then sell to other countries. So I think that is how, I don't think we're ready yet to share. to be able to be this thought leader, but we could be if we had this part of our regulation and we had innovation and thinking about how do we do this in the most sustainable way. Because then going back to what we were talking about before, this isn't just sort of one AI application, one or two AI applications in a couple of sectors here in Europe. This is massive. This is global. And the carbon emissions that we were talking about, then think about the massive companies whose business model relies on AI. Business model relies on advertising, and you need to understand preferences of consumers and whatnot. So yes, it would be great to use AI for the SDGs, but the majority of applications will not be targeted towards the SDGs. So we have to look at how do we get a grip on the environmental consequences, and then we know whether or not we should be capping emissions. You can only train for a certain number of hours, or up to a certain number of emissions and whatnot. Then we know. Anyway, it should be in the AI Act. That's the bottom line.
Sure. And Anna, you wanted to comment quickly on this?
Yes, because I think it's right that we should stand tall and bold and say, I mean, with the Cloud Act, the US companies have to think again, and we have a large US organization using our platform, and they have different drivers. They don't have the drivers that they want to violate regulation, or they don't want to do harm. They have the driver that they are going to get sued if they don't have this correctly, if they don't exhaust every risk that regulation and GDPR can't grasp, and also exactly how they code their organization's ethical values, and also what specific use case. Every specific use case has to be seen in their environment, and how it could be misused, overused, and create discrimination. So that opens up a new driver that we shouldn't underestimate.
Yes. And so I think, yes, I'm thinking, and maybe you're going to comment on that, because I think one of the key aspects is the data of AI, and I'm not sure if that's but I usually sometimes, you know, with the digital twin projects and these things, one of is the quality of data, and how do you get, you know, that from the global reality that we're in. And I don't know if, Emanuela, what do you think, because right now we're building a very European project. Is there a way that we can maybe...
But actually, there is a project. I just first wanted to comment on this, and then I come back to that. I think that, as you said, I mean, it should be, I mean, like a sort of a labeling of AI system. I mean, like the carbon footprint or everything. It should be included in the AI Act, and actually, it was included in the very first release. But then they removed it because they thought that maybe it's, I don't know, it's too much, and then they removed it. Maybe since they're discussing now at the final release, hopefully it will be included again. And I think that this is a good step, because, I mean, if we think about also the education of citizens, I mean, yesterday in the Finnish pavilion, they presented us elements of AI, but we should also educate people probably on the impact that AI system have on the environment. And so, I mean, if they look about, I mean, how much is the carbon footprint of an AI system, then people, I think they will be more, especially young people, they will be more sensitive about this topic. So I think that also like, the labeling and the education program on this, it is very, very useful. And this project that you were mentioning about data, there is a very interesting global project. Actually, they're developing two great things, and it's developed by one of these, I mean, big corporations. It's developed by Microsoft, and it's called AI Health. And it's, sorry, they're collecting, I mean, huge amount of data about agricultural worldwide, and they're creating, of course, I mean, these, massive clouds full of data, but then they are, I mean, making this data available to improve the sustainability of agriculture. So we can do good, I mean, with AI for good projects. I mean, there are lots of, and this is, sorry, I mean, if you think about, I mean, the power, how powerful these big corporations they are. I mean, we were talking, there will be the health workshop afterwards, and it's exactly the same also in health, that, I mean, they are so powerful because they have, I mean, in a massive amount of data, they have the power to calculate this data, so computer power, and so of course, and then they have the investment, so they have everything that, the government don't have in this moment because they're not really working together. So of course the results that they get are much higher. But the other thing that they're doing, which I think it's very interesting, again, this, with Microsoft Foundation, they're defining a framework for data sharing agreement. And this is also, this is really to protect small farmers, from sharing the data, but they can share their data in a sort of safe way so that they're kind of protected. So they get the benefit of sharing the data, but they're also protected. And this is, again, always, dual use of AI. So, you can have great benefit, great opportunities, but also risk. And I think that this is also a way for protecting this. And I think that listening to all this project, something that we were doing, we wrote this book with the Italian Association for Artificial Intelligence, is Artificial Intelligence for Sustainable Development. And we started collecting for each SDGs the opportunities and the risk, and how to manage the risk. And then we started collecting best cases, startup projects that are, worldwide, so in Europe, but also globally. And I think that an ontology of all these projects would be very interesting. Like we said in the AI Act, we will start defining a list of the AI system, but we should also start, with the projects that are addressing sustainability. And I think that this would be very, very useful, of course.
Yes, and that's when we talk about AI excellence, and not only in Europe and beyond, then it does seem that there are so many great projects out there that can really help to solve some of these climate crisis problems that we have. But there's missing an overall shared framework for this. There's so many data sharing initiatives. There's different projects like the ones we've seen today, but they are not connected. And maybe that's what we need to have, like a global approach. Ricardo, you have a comment? And then I'll say, if you can respond to this, and then in the end I would really like here, because we have 10 minutes left of the debate, and I would like to have you all to have one final comment then.
I will be brief. I wanted to comment on what you mentioned about the opportunities and making it global. I think there are so many nice projects who have done it kind of separately. Like we did it for each of the targets. The group in Oxford has done it with projects related to all the SDGs and all the targets. So there are certainly many more things to do to really assess the positive and the negative effects. And regarding the effect of companies, and it's very difficult to implement it, and I agree. But an whole idea, which is now being pushed again, a lot of the carbon allowances, which in a way could bring together to the same bag also the companies with business models that rely on AI, because then you really have a cap and you would put all of them in the same level. And also personal carbon allowances. Individually, what is your consumption, what you're doing, and then you also bring all the apps and all the things. So these are all ideas that now are having a renewed life, and I think that, of course, the regulatory framework for that is quite complex, but maybe it should be the way to go.
Thank you, Ricardo. So what I would really like here at the end, we have 10 minutes left. And so we've had really a lot of ideas up in the air, and very interesting views into the processes of both creating AI solutions for sustainability, but also thinking about how can we actually, for example, measure the impact of AI on the environment in and by itself. So, but if you have to think, each of you, of one key recommendation from your perspective you would give to once, of course, develop this approach in Europe, but also to how can we make sure that we make this into tackling a global problem. So it's not just Europe tackling a European project or problem, but Europe helping to tackle in collaboration with the rest of the world. So who had time to think about that while I was talking? So Spiros.
So one of our missions is to actually become the paradigm, let's say, for sustainability for AI and sustainable AI. So it's more than the data sharing to the world. It's more about the approach that we have, the risks that that are under our business use cases, our business cases, that they are being validated by the domain experts, And all this we're planning to share our approach, our issues, the resources needed, the ethical issues that you need to check. So, and we plan to share them, as you have seen the video, in AI on demand platform, which we aim to have it as the one-stop shop for a European approach. And this can be like the global message also to the other countries.
You?
Maybe I can. I think the data is key. And of course, if we want to have global solutions with developing countries, for example, then the lack of data is one of the biggest challenges. So to have coordinated actions so one can gather good and usable data there. And of course, AI can increase the existing inequalities if the future solutions are going to be relying on AI. But data centers, computers, data, everything can be accessed remotely, even if the infrastructure is not in place. So to really think of those global solutions in such a way that they can be accessed remotely, models, data, and that also developing countries can benefit from the solutions that are being developed with all the SDGs holistically in mind.
Okay. Do you want to go next time? Oh, sorry.
So I think organizational responsibility and accountability is the key here. If we can make organizations report their performance to create trust among stakeholders, for us client to opt in, I think we can export that trustworthy, ethical, sustainable business model to the US. I'm convinced.
So then I guess picking up on that, because I completely agree with that idea, except that I think it'll be more difficult to export the trustworthy framework, because our ethics, we do need to recognize that we have a different sort of ethics over here in the West. But then that we need companies to be accountable, and the way to do that is to have regulation that demands that they track and are transparent about what it is that they have recorded. And then once we have that information, that's when we get to the point where we get to raise awareness of the consumer, raise awareness of the average individual. Because right now we can talk about a few case studies, the GPT-3 or the Struble example, with the 600,000 pounds of carbon emissions. So we need companies to be required to measure, to be transparent about those measurements. Then we have enough information for us to decide to go forward. And like I said before, if it is in the AI Act, then we get to inspire and stimulate the community of researchers here in Europe to become the innovators in sustainable AI.
Thank you.
All right. I think what I would like to add is dare to question the context. So I think that's a strength in Europe, and I think that's something that we can bring also globally. That maybe you've been busy developing an AI for something that maybe you shouldn't, and then another solution that's much more simple, like closing down the building and use it for something else because no people are sitting in it. Then that's the context that you always need to question, and you should dare to question it, because maybe lots of money has been invested in developing something, but in the end, a good solution, should always be a good solution, and not just, oh, I've been busy with all that for such a long time, so we definitely need to use it now. No, just dare to question the context.
Thank you.
Okay, so you already said, all the important things I think that had to be said, and I will launch a sort of a provocation, because I think that I was reading in these days, what happened with the situation in Ukraine, that there was this IT army. So basically, they were publishing in Telegram. I don't know if you heard about it. They were publishing some target, and there was a sort of a digital army worldwide that was doing hacking on this target. So I was thinking, I know that the parallelism, it's not really, appropriate probably, but I was thinking, if we think that we are in a sort of sixth mass extinction, and that we are really, putting in danger the life of our planet, so it's sort of a kind of of a war, I mean, with climate change. So maybe we should launch a sort of a call, like, I don't know, a climate change army or something like this, and really, I mean, to start publishing what we need to do, like air pollution, or like education, or like, I mean, building systems and so on, and really publishing all these targets and launch this call and see, I mean, who kind of, I mean, respond to this call and start working and start developing new ideas that then can become project initiatives and so on. So maybe this could be also something that can be done. It can be done outside Europe. I mean, outside European borders too.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there is in the Horizon Europe funding. There is actually quite a budget is put apart for
the climate change army.
Yes, exactly. So we have to think.
Climate crisis, perfect.
So we have to think of it as a crisis response, maybe. Yes. Thank you. So I mean, we are getting to the end now, and we are actually good on time, and I have to thank you all for this amazing workshop marathon, maybe we could call it, but I mean, we have some important crisis response to establish now. I really appreciated your recommendations here, thinking about both assessments, the need for assessments, requirements to include these topics in the AI Act, and maybe also sometimes just in places where we have to think of, maybe there's areas where we just don't need AI. That's, I think, is a recommendation by itself. So I just want to thank you, and thank you. All right.